Former US President Donald Trump has been convicted in New York. Here are my thoughts coming up right after this. Hey everyone, this is Yoel, and so grateful to have you back on my YouTube channel, or on my YouTube channel, not back if it's your first time coming to my channel. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about the recent conviction of former president, possibly future president, Donald Trump in New York. And no doubt that any of you watching this has watched or heard about the news, so I'm not going to get into all that or what the trial was about. And I want to say from the outset that any of you who are regular subscribers to my channel and visitors to my channel, if you haven't subscribed yet, by the way, I'd be grateful if you took a second to do that. But anybody who knows me and is familiar with my channel knows that I stay away from politics. And actually, in sharing my thoughts here, I'm not attempting to get into politics, although I know by virtue of the topic at hand, many or some or many could take this as being political, but it's not my intention at all. I actually wanted to talk about this from a perspective of my background as an attorney and what I feel about what transpired as an attorney. Okay, so that's the risk I take by getting into something as hot topic as Donald Trump. But I did feel, just based on reading the news and watching interviews and just seeing what's going on in, regarding his trial, I thought that I have something to add here, or at least to, I don't know if it's, I wouldn't say something to add in the sense that I haven't seen anybody talk about this, but more just to give the perspective of the average Joe, if you will, the average Joe being me. Okay, so what I wanted to say is that I feel that this trial, everything surrounding the trial and the conviction is unjust, okay? Is unjust. Now, why do I feel that way? It's got nothing to do with my political views, whether or not I endorse Donald Trump, whether or not I endorse Joe Biden, what my political views are, whether or not I'm a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. It has nothing to do with that. I'm looking at the actual legal basis of this trial. And to me, the number one fundamental concern is that there was, in the very least, an appearance of bias from the get-go. And something that's very fundamental to having a fair trial is to remove that appearance of bias, okay? And one can argue, not only is there an appearance of bias, one can actually argue there may be an actual bias. So I'm talking about, for example, reports of the judge in this case contributing to the Democratic Party. Okay, leaving aside the issue of his daughter, I know a lot of people are making claims about his daughter profiting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm talking about, if it's true, by the way, and I don't claim to be this investigative journalist that looks into every claim, but I don't believe I've seen anybody contesting this. If it's true that the judge actually did contribute to the Democratic Party, from my perspective as an attorney, and I should mention I've been an attorney since 2005. I don't do courtroom law anymore, although I once did in my career. And so from my perspective as a lawyer, and many of you I think may not be aware of this, all the comments I'm seeing out there about justice being served. I mean, the fundamental part of justice is that any trier of fact or anybody involved in the trial of someone cannot give way to any sort of appearance of there being bias against that person or for that person. And the obvious reason being, because if somebody's going to have a fair trial, if there's any sort of impression of bias one way or the other, then that isn't a fair trial, is it? Right? So this actually dates back to very early times. In the Jewish faith, there's all sorts of ancient texts that talk about the bias of judges. And, there's a famous case in the Talmudic times where there was an ongoing dispute about overhanging branches from a tree. And the judge in the case had realized that there were, he had a dispute with his own neighbor about trees overhanging onto the neighbor's yard. Of course, I'm kind of giving you the head notes. It's more detailed than this. But the point is that the judge took pains to remove that bias before he rendered a decision in the case of these parties, because he realized that any sort of impression of bias is going to taint the justice process. Okay, and there's all sorts of other examples of giving each side the right to present their case. Okay, everything about the justice system is intended so as to remove any sort of feeling that, or reason to believe that there isn't any unfairness going on. Okay. Now, in this case, when you have a trial that is conducted by a judge, now many of you watching this may say, well, it's decided by a jury. Sure, but the judge is making all sorts of decisions based on the evidence, meaning based on whatever materials that the prosecution, those trying to get Trump convicted, whatever they're trying to put forward, there's a judge making a decision whether or not to allow that evidence, okay? Whether or not certain statements should be allowed, how the trial should be conducted, and ultimately now, post-conviction, whether or not Trump should be put in jail, okay, as part of his sentencing, okay? Now, if the judge did indeed, assuming this is the truth, okay, and again, I haven't seen anything to the contrary, okay, and anybody who has any feedback can leave that in the comments, but if the judge, and this is just one element of bias that I've read about, okay, I'm not even getting into the other elements that give that appearance of bias. I would argue, by the way, whether or not it's true, the fact that, you know, the judge's daughter has some sort of parallel ongoing you know, fundraising activities, money, whatever the case is, that alone, I would say, could give an appearance of bias. So when that's happening, how could anybody be put on a fair trial? I've seen a lot about people saying, you know, Trump is not above the law, and just like a person without the means of Trump would be put on trial, okay, then somebody with the means of Trump should be put on trial. So there's all this talk about the law being fair, equally fair about for a poor person as it would be for a wealthy person like Trump. But if you're going to talk about fairness, then the same fairness that should be for a non-famous person, because that doesn't have any impact on a presidential race, should apply to Trump. You can't have one and not the other. But yet I haven't seen anybody who's been, you know, anti-Trump, if you will, talking about that. Okay. And, you know, I'll just to give you an example of how far a judge should, in my opinion, should go to remove that appearance of bias. There was a case that I remember a colleague of mine being involved in, and before the case had started, you know, the lawyers are there, and it's not like the movies where the lawyers are fighting with each other. A lot of times the lawyers are kind of kibitzing and they're joking around. I mean, even the opposing lawyers, they're joking around before the trial actually starts. And just in some banter that the lawyers were having with the judge asked one of the party's attorneys about golf, and they started talking. And then before the trial started, the judge said, you know what, I've got to remove myself. And the other lawyer, who the judge was not bantering with in the same way, didn't even ask for this judge to be removed. But the judge said, you know what, I started bantering with this one lawyer, and that already raises this appearance that I may be biased because I had a friendly conversation. Okay, that is by the way, that may sound extreme, but I can't think of specific examples now. But throughout my career, anytime there's any sort of appearance of any sort of bias, judges will take pains, like this judge did, to remove himself or herself. Okay, and I myself as an attorney know that if there was any sort of perception that I myself may be conflicted, okay, it's a sort of similar principle. If I would have a conflict of interest. So for example, if I had like some 10th cousin once removed who I have nothing to do with, but that person's a relative, okay, of another party who my client may want to sue, for example, when I was a practicing attorney, I wouldn't take that case because I knew that would have a potential for a conflict or having the appearance of being conflicted. That's how far a judge or even an attorney has to go to remove that bias. And in this case, I don't see how one could possibly, how can one possibly look at this trial and say to himself or herself that in the very least, there wasn't at least an appearance that there would be bias. The very fact that Donald Trump is the front runner to be the Republican nominee, and by many accounts actually leading in the polls to be the president. I know polls aren't necessarily indicative, but the fact is he's not just some minor independent running for office. He is, by many accounts, the leading runner, and if not leading, definitely neck and neck with Joe Biden. How could one possibly say that there isn't an appearance of bias? Okay, with all due respect to the prosecutor, to get up and to say that they approach this trial like any other trial, I don't think there's anybody in the world who, if they're being really honest, can really take that claim to be serious, to take that claim seriously. And again, this has nothing to do with my personal views of whether or not Trump was guilty. And frankly, I don't know. I don't have enough of the information. It's got nothing to do with that. Okay. I would be saying the same thing if it was the other way around and it was Joe Biden put on trial for the very same things, and it was a judge who contributed to the Republican Party. This has nothing to do with politics. That's why I started by saying it's nothing to do with politics. From a pure legal perspective, I don't see how anybody, oftentimes we talk about the reasonable person test. Okay. I don't know how any reasonable person could conclude that there isn't at least the appearance of bias. And by the way, this kind of, comes home. You can see this by look at the reaction. Take Jimmy Kimmel, for example. And by the way, when I talk about bias, I actually did a video, talking about why the secret to Jimmy Kimmel's success. I think I profiled Jimmy Kimmel. If I didn't profile him, there's definitely a video in my library where I speak praisingly of Jimmy Kimmel, despite, the fact that there's politics out there that half the country probably can't stand him. Okay, so, I'm not just picking on Jimmy Kimmel because he's obviously definitely left wing. Again, I'm not to get political, but look at Jimmy Kimmel, how excited he is to see the conviction. Just go to his channel and you'll see him talking about it, and you'll see all the videos of his channel leading up to the trial. So how could you say, okay, now you can say that that's extreme and the judge isn't Jimmy Kimmel. I get that. But at the end of the day, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that anybody who is a Democrat can at least potentially be happy about this verdict, because they may perceive this as removing the threat to Joe Biden becoming president. Now, whether or not this will actually remove the threat to Joe Biden, in other words, will Donald Trump be elected nonetheless as president? Time will tell. And that's not the intention of this video, to make predictions. I definitely do think, though, it is possible that, it's interesting. If you watch the left-wing channels, a lot of them will say that people that were kind of unsure now may not vote for Trump because he's a convicted felon. By the way, I have thoughts about the idea of labeling too. It goes to show you how strong labeling is. I've talked about this in other videos. I plan to do a future video in the personal development consciousness part of my channel, where you see just how strong labeling could be. Because look how again, this has nothing to do with my political views, but look how those who do have it out for Trump, let's face it, are taking a lot of pleasure in having that ability to put a label of convicted felon onto Donald Trump. So you do see the power of labeling. But anyways, as I was saying before, it's interesting. If you see the left-wing channels, a lot of them are saying, well, now people that were uncertain may just vote for Joe Biden. But if you look at the right-wing channels, a lot of them have been saying, well, it's interesting. Now people that are uncertain may just vote for Donald Trump to show their outrage. So it remains to be seen how this is going to play out politically, okay, whether or not this will sway the voters. But that's not the point of my channel, of my video here. The point of my video is just to state that from a legal perspective, we've always known that the legal system is not perfect and it can be broken in many ways. But frankly, I think it's very disingenuous to suggest that this is a win for the justice system, that this is justice being served. In my humble opinion, there is no way that this is a win for justice being served. This is a classic case of a fundamental tenet of justice not being served. And that's regardless of who the person on trial would have been here, whether or not it had been Joe Biden or Donald Trump. So I'm sure many will still take this as being a political statement. There may be some hate mail out there. I welcome your feedback, and I am curious to see what your comments are, what your thoughts are on this conviction. What do you think about my thoughts about the legality of it, about the perception of bias that's underlying this entire trial? I'm curious to see your feedback, and I don't want to start policing feedback. But again, the intention isn't to get into a political discussion. So I hope you'll keep the discussion to what I'm talking about here, which is the legality of the decision made, not what you think of Trump or what you think of Biden. But we'll see what happens in the comment section. I'm grateful for you coming to my channel, to watching this video. Those who've subscribed, again, thank you for doing that. If you haven't yet, I'd appreciate it if you did. Definitely it helps me, but it also helps you not miss a future video. If you are new to the channel, have a look at the library. I talk a lot about consciousness and other interesting topics. I've got video series on Michael Singer and Eckhart Tolle, and also some fun stuff such as a series on the History of Curb Your Enthusiasm podcast, and other videos on Hollywood film and television as well. Okay, so thank you once again, and until next time, I look forward to seeing you at the next video. Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. I've got plenty more in my videos library. If there's a topic you'd like me to discuss, feel free to leave that in the comments and I'll do my best to address it. If you can like the video, I'd be very grateful. As well, if you subscribed, you'd be helping me out. You'd also be helping yourself out to not miss a future video. Thanks so much. Have a great day.